Most armies in history tried very hard not to die. The Spartans had a different opinion. They showed up to some of history's deadliest battles in a red cloak, a helmet, and essentially nothing else. And they kept winning. So, what exactly was going on? First, a small correction. Spartans did wear some armor, but compared to almost every other ancient military, it was shockingly minimal, and the reasons why tell you something deeply strange about how Spartan society worked. To understand the armor, you first have to understand the shield. The hoplon, a heavy circular shield about a meter wide. This thing was doing most of the protective work. It weighed about 7 kilograms, which doesn't sound bad until you remember they also carried a 2-meter spear and a short sword. Add a full suit of bronze body armor on top of that, and you've built a human tank that moves at the speed of a tired grandfather. Speed and endurance mattered more to Spartans than personal protection. That was a deliberate trade. Now, here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. The Spartan military formation was called the phalanx. In a phalanx, your shield doesn't primarily protect you. It protects the man to your left. Your protection comes from the man to your right, who is also relying on the man to his right, and so on. The entire formation is one interconnected survival organism. Individual armor becomes somewhat secondary, which explains something the Spartans said that sounds insane on the surface. Dropping your shield was considered more disgraceful than dropping your pants in the agora. Plutarch actually recorded Spartan mothers saying, "Come back with your shield, or on it. Not your helmet, not your sword. The shield." Because abandoning your shield meant abandoning your brother next to you. That was the actual crime. So the minimal armor wasn't laziness. It was a philosophical statement about collective survival over individual survival. Now let's talk about what Spartans actually wore, because there's a lot of mythology mixed in here. The Corinthian helmet. Full bronze, covered most of the face. Very intimidating. Also nearly impossible to hear in. Tactically, that's a problem. Spartans knew this. Over time, Spartan soldiers shifted toward open-faced helmets, prioritizing awareness and coordination over facial protection. Again, not carelessness. A calculated downgrade in one type of protection to gain another. The linothorax. A breastplate made from layers of linen glued together. Surprisingly effective. Cheap to make. Modern experiments have shown compressed linen can stop arrowheads and deflect glancing sword blows. It was also significantly lighter than bronze, which, again, was the point. Greaves, bronze shin guards. These were non-negotiable for most hoplite soldiers, including Spartans. Because in a phalanx, the lower legs stick out beneath the bottom edge of your shield. A very convenient target. A severed tendon or shattered shin, and a soldier was done. Greaves were practical, not decorative. So what did Spartans leave unprotected? Arms, thighs, most of the back, and sometimes the torso. This sounds reckless until you understand how phalanx combat actually worked. In formation, your back was covered by the man behind you pushing forward. Your sides were covered by the formation's depth. The exposed areas were only exposed if the formation broke, and if the formation broke, no amount of armor saved you. So Spartans trained not to break. Which brings us to the real story here, the Agoge, the Spartan education and training system, one of the most extreme institutions ever designed by human beings. It began at age 7. Boys were taken from their families and placed into military dormitories. They were deliberately underfed, not by accident, on purpose, to teach them to endure hunger. They were also encouraged to steal food. But if they were caught, they were punished, not for stealing, for getting caught. The logic being that a soldier who cannot feed himself covertly in enemy territory is a liability. They slept on reeds they cut themselves. They were given 1 cloak per year, regardless of season. 1 cloak, winter included. Ancient Sparta got cold. This was not a minor inconvenience. The point of all of this was to produce men who didn't need comfort to function. Men for whom armor was a bonus, not a requirement. The minimal armor wasn't just tactical, it was psychological, both for the Spartan wearing it and the enemy seeing it. When you see an army march toward you mostly unprotected, with no apparent concern for their own survival, it is deeply disturbing. It implies they know something you don't. It implies they are not afraid of you. Neither of those things are good for morale. Herodotus wrote that before the Battle of Thermopylae, a Persian scout reported back that the Spartans were casually combing their hair. The Persian king Xerxes found this hilarious. His advisor Demaratus did not. Demaratus told him, "When Spartan men groom their hair, they are about to risk their lives. This is what they do before a fight." Xerxes did not listen. Things did not go well at Thermopylae. Initially, 300 Spartans held the pass for 3 days against an army estimated in the hundreds of thousands. The geography helped. The narrow pass neutralized the Persian numbers. But the Spartans also just hit different. Their training meant they could fight in shifts, rotate through the phalanx, rest briefly, go again, for hours. Persian soldiers weren't trained for that kind of sustained close-range brutality. Most armies weren't, so light armor plus extreme endurance plus superb formation discipline equaled something close to a tactical cheat code. But let's not romanticize this too much, because the cost of building that machine was genuinely horrifying. Spartan newborns were examined by elders. If deemed too weak or deformed, they were left at the foot of Mount Apothetai, which is a polite way of saying left to die of exposure on a hillside. Sparta was optimizing from birth. Those who survived infancy entered the Agoge at 7. We covered that part, but it kept getting worse. At age 12, Spartan boys entered a ritual called the cryptia. They were sent out into the countryside at night, armed with only a knife, with one job: kill helots, the enslaved population of Sparta, without being caught, as a training exercise. The helots outnumbered Spartan citizens by roughly 7-1. Sparta controlled them through systematic terror. The cryptia served two purposes: train young soldiers in stealth and killing, and remind the helots they were never safe. This is the part that doesn't make the inspirational posters, but it's inseparable from how Sparta functioned. Spartan warriors could train full-time because helots did all the farming and labor. The whole system depended on that. Without the helots, there was no Spartan army. The armor was light because the helots carried everything else, literally. Spartan armies on campaign brought helot attendants who carried supplies, cooked food, and maintained equipment. So when you see that iconic image of a Spartan warrior, lean and unencumbered, remember what's off-frame. Now, back to the armor itself. There's another factor nobody talks about: climate. Ancient Greece in summer is brutally hot. Full bronze armor in direct sunlight is essentially a wearable oven. Heat exhaustion in heavy armor kills soldiers before the enemy gets a chance. Armies knew this. Lighter armor meant better heat management, longer effective combat time before your body started betraying you. Ancient Greek battles were often decided in under an hour of actual fighting. Endurance over that window was everything. The side that broke and ran first lost. Routing armies were cut down from behind. Armor didn't help much then, which is why Spartans had another saying worth remembering: return with your shield, because if you drop it, you are running. A man carried home dead on his shield was honored. A man who came home without it was finished in Spartan society. There's actually a recorded case of a Spartan mother disowning her son for surviving a battle when his unit did not. The culture of shame and collective accountability was so embedded that it functioned as psychological armor. Men don't run when they're more afraid of going home than they are of dying. That's the actual Spartan defense system. Let's talk briefly about what happened when Sparta met enemies who didn't fight in phalanx formations. Spoiler, it didn't always go great. The phalanx was devastating in the right terrain, terrible in others. At the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BC, around 120 Spartans surrendered. The ancient world was stunned. Not because of the number, because Spartans weren't supposed to surrender. That wasn't in the script. The Athenians had used ranged skirmishers and javelin throwers on rough terrain. The phalanx couldn't engage properly. Light armor that helps you in a phalanx does nothing useful if the phalanx can't form. That's the vulnerability. Sparta's entire military identity was so locked into one formation that adapting to irregular warfare took generations. But for a very long time, in the terrain and context where they fought, they were functionally unstoppable. The red cloak, by the way, had a practical function too. Spartans wore it specifically to hide bloodstains. So an injured Spartan wouldn't visibly alarm his comrades or embolden his enemies by showing blood. Every single design choice, from the cloak color to the open helmet to the minimal breastplate, was intentional. Spartans weren't poorly equipped. They were precisely equipped. There's a significant difference. The minimal armor was the result of 300 years of refined military thinking distilled into a single, brutal philosophy. You don't need armor if you never break. You don't need to not break if you've never been taught that breaking is an option, and you ensure that by raising humans from age 7 inside a system that treats fear as a personal failure. Whether that's admirable or monstrous probably depends on whether you survived it. Spartan society eventually declined. Not from a great military defeat, but from a demographic collapse. The Agoge and constant warfare killed too many of the men who were supposed to produce the next generation of warriors. By the time of the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, Sparta fielded fewer than 1,000 full citizen warriors. They lost, and Sparta never fully recovered its military dominance. The machine had consumed itself. But for the peak centuries, the combination of minimal armor, maximum conditioning, and collective discipline was extraordinary. They built a military system where the absence of things, armor, comfort, fear, was the actual source of strength, which is either a profound insight into human potential or a deeply depressing story about what you can make humans accept if you start early enough. Possibly both. Sparta rarely did things that were only one thing. So next time someone tells you the Spartans fought in no armor, correct them. They fought in exactly as much armor as they'd calculated they needed, and they'd been calculating it for 300 years. They just decided that the most important armor was the man next to you, and that you'd better not let him down. Or else. Sleep well. You didn't have to do the Agoge today. So that's something. Today was a very comfortable day compared to literally any Spartan's Tuesday, which is either motivating or depressing. We'll let you decide. One last thing, Spartans also apparently had excellent abs. Because of course they did. The universe has a very specific sense of humor. The most terrifying warriors in the ancient world also looked the best doing it, deeply unfair. Thanks for watching.